A thick mist clung to the dense forest surrounding Ogrich's lab, blurring the towering silhouettes of ancient trees. The Shire Kingdom's natural beauty was smothered by an air of unease, its peaceful ambience disrupted by the lab's cold, industrial presence. The flickering lights illuminated the building, a monolith of steel and shadow, casting unnatural shapes over the quiet landscape. This was a place of dark secrets, where science and sorcery intertwined. Inside, the grim research of Augurk, a man feared as much for his cunning as for his cruelty festered. His work revolved around Nexi, strange stones that could bend reality itself. The energy within them had the power to warp minds, erase memories, and strip away the identity of those caught in its grip. This lab was a prison not just of metal and walls, but of the very essence of those held within. The Shire Kingdom, once vibrant and green, was now a kingdom in name only. Factions fought unseen battles in the shadows, each vying for control of the Nexi's forbidden power. The forest stood like a relic of a time long past, when peace hadn't yet been corrupted by such insidious forces. And here Lynx, one of Augur's victims, sat bound, his past life as Turan almost entirely erased by the scientist's wicked hand. In the shadowed depths of the forest, a cluster of clans huddled beneath the misty canopy. Their painted faces, a blend of vibrant hues, blue, orange, and green, stood out like smudged rainbows against the gray surroundings. Their exaggerated expressions, smiles stretched too wide and frowns carved deep, seemed ill-suited to the silence that swallowed their whispers. Jix, their leader, tightened his grip on a twisted wooden staff, his voice a low murmur that carried through the mist. The shadows creep closer each night. Augurk's lab disturbs the old energies, stirring something that should have stayed buried. They turned their eyes toward the distant lab, where Augurk's machinery hummed ominously, a discordant note amidst the natural chorus. Despite their strange, jesting appearances, the clans sensed the danger lurking in the forest, the kind that threatened to consume more than just land. Deeper in the heart of the Brotherhood stronghold, Lyra moved with the silent precision of a trained infiltrator. The corridors twisted like a labyrinth, dimly lit and filled with secrets that pressed down on her like a physical weight. She had once believed in the Brotherhood's promises, had trusted in the power they claimed to offer. But that belief had withered under the cold reality of Delkol's methods and Augurk's inhumane experiments. Captured during a reconnaissance mission months before her brother, Turan, was taken, she had witnessed firsthand the transformation of her younger sibling into Lynx, a name that sent chills down her spine. Yet, she clung to the hope that a part of Turan still survived beneath the layers of conditioning forced upon him. The Brotherhood thought her a loyal operative, but her every step through their halls was laced with a hidden defiance. The memory of Turan's laughter haunted her, a sound she hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. It played in her mind as a reminder of the person he used to be, a tether that held her to her mission. She glanced around the dim corridor, ensuring no one watched before slipping a small knife into her sleeve. She knew she would need it when the time came. She had seen Augurk's experiments up close, had heard the fractured cries of those whose minds had been broken, their memories turned to fog. Her resolve hardened. She would save Turan, even if it meant risking everything she had built within the Brotherhood. Failure was not an option. The stakes were far too high. The cold, sterile air of Augurk's lab stung Lyra's lungs as she slipped through a heavy metal door, the quiet hum of machinery pressing down on her. Glass vials glowed with eerie, pale light, casting shadows that seemed to twist and writhe across the walls. Each step she took was accompanied by the faint creak of the floor beneath her boots, a reminder that every moment in this place was stolen. In a secluded corner, Lynx sat chained, the cold metal biting into his wrists. His head hung low, blonde hair falling over his face, obscuring eyes that had once shone vibrant. Now they reflected nothing but the dull ache of a fractured mind. Flashes of warmth and laughter, echoes from when he was still Turan, fought against the cold grip of Augurk's conditioning. The door groaned shut behind Lyra, and she stilled, listening for any sign that she'd been followed. Silence answered her, save for the rhythmic thrum of the lab's machinery. She stepped closer, her breath fogging in the chilly air, as she whispered, "Turan?" At the sound of his old name, Lynx flinched, a spasm running through his frame. He lifted his head, eyes unfocused, like someone waking from a long dream. "Who?" His voice cracked, dry and hoarse, as if the word itself was foreign to him. "It's me," Lyra said, crouching before him, her gaze darting to the door. "Look at me, Turan. Focus." A flicker of recognition sparked in Lynx's eyes, but it was fleeting, swallowed by the haze that clouded his mind. He strained against the chains, searching her face, his expression caught between confusion and desperation. Why are you here? Because you're still my brother, she hissed, her tone urgent, as if trying to break through the fog in his mind with sheer force. We don't have much time. They think I'm loyal to them, but their eyes aren't as sharp as they believe. She kept her voice low, leaning in as if the weight of her words could bridge the distance between them. Lynx's breathing quickened, memories flashing in and out like fragments of a shattered mirror. From he remembered fields of wildflowers, the warmth of a sunlit afternoon, and Lyra's laughter. But each time he reached for the memory, it slipped away, replaced by the cold commands that York had etched into his thoughts. I can't remember, he admitted, voice breaking, as if the admission cost him something precious. Lyra's expression tightened, a flash of pain crossing her features before she masked it with determination. If you don't need to remember everything right now, just trust me. I can get you out of here. She reached out as if to touch his hand, but then she hesitated, her fingers hovering inches from his. But I can't do it alone. You have to fight whatever they've put inside your head. Lynx's chains rattled as he shifted, but the weight of his conditioning kept him anchored. He met her gaze, and for a brief moment, something softened in his expression, an echo of the boy she once knew. I don't know if I can. You have to, she urged, her voice edged with desperation. If we stay here, her words cut off as shadows shifted behind them, the low murmur of voices seeping through the vents, a reminder of the ever-present danger that surrounded them. Lyra glanced over her shoulder, then back at Lynx, her expression hardening. I made my choice, Tyran. I'm not leaving without you, even if it means. But she never finished her sentence, because at that moment the shadows parted to reveal a group of clans, their painted faces serious for once, their colors muted against the cold backdrop of the lab. A silence settled over the lab, broken only by the faint hum of machinery. Then, a shadow shifted near the far wall, and a figure emerged, a man cloaked in black, his face hidden behind a long, beaked mask that gleamed under the flickering lights. He moved with an unnerving grace, the hem of his dark robes whispering against the cold floor as he approached. The plague doctor. He stopped just beyond the reach of the dim light, his voice smooth and oily as it slid through the air. Ah, the lost sister has come to play, he crooned, the mockery in his tone evident. But do you think you can free him from my grasp? Perhaps I should use you as a new test subject instead. How delightful that would be. Lyra's jaw clenched, but she refused to step back, planting herself between the plague doctor and her brother. Her grip on the metal rod she'd hidden beneath her cloak tightened. You won't touch him. She spat, a sharp edge to her voice. Tyran, you have to fight this. Remember who you are. Lynx's thoughts swirled in a storm of confusion. He could hear Lyra's voice, feel the warmth of her desperation, but it was smothered by the cold commands that still echoed in his mind. The plague doctor's presence loomed like a shadow over his thoughts, the darkness clinging to him, suffocating. He wanted to fight, but the chains binding him seemed to tighten with every struggle, as if they were more than just metal, like they had been forged from the very willpower the plague doctor had stolen from him. Look at how he struggles, the plague doctor hissed, his words like poison. He held up a small, dark Nexi stone, its surface swirling with a malevolent glow. Do you think a few whispered words will save him? Watch as I remind him where he belongs. He pressed the stone against Lynx's forehead, and a jolt of dark energy surged through Lynx's body, twisting his memories into something unrecognizable. The warmth of his childhood running through sunlit fields with Lyra faded, replaced by icy darkness. The tendrils of Nexi energy coiled through his mind, drowning out the memory of his sister's voice, pulling him deeper into the shadow. Tyran, listen to me. Lyra's shout cut through the haze, desperate and raw. She swung her rod at the plague doctor, forcing him to step back, the impact sparking against the metal floor. You're not his puppet. You're my brother. The plague doctor laughed, a harsh, grating sound that echoed through the lab. He raised a hand, summoning a swirling vortex of shadow that lashed out at Lyra, forcing her to stumble back. He is mine, sister, just as you will be. Your pathetic attempts to save him are amusing but futile. Lynx's vision blurred as the plague doctor's power crashed over him, pressing down with a weight that felt like it could crush his very soul. But through the darkness, he could just make out the shape of Lyra, her eyes fierce, her stance unwavering even as she faced a monster that had twisted him into something unrecognizable. For a moment, a flicker of clarity pierced through the fog clouding Lynx's mind, a memory of a promise, buried deep. He could almost hear Lyra's voice, bright with the laughter of a summer long past. You promise me you'll stay strong? The memory slipped through his fingers like sand, but it left a warmth that pushed against the cold grip of the Nexi. Stop this, Plague Doctor. Lyra swung her rod again, aiming for the stone in his hand. The air crackled with energy as their clash sent sparks flying. He's not yours to control. The Plague Doctor's eyes gleamed with sadistic delight behind the mask, and he sidestepped her strike with an ease that spoke of countless battles fought in the shadows. He turned his attention back to Lynx, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You are nothing without me. Submit, boy. Lynx's chains rattled as he struggled, caught between the force of the Plague Doctor's commands and the faint warmth that Lyra's presence brought. The voices of those lost to Ogrich's experiments murmured through the vents, their whispers mingling with his own fractured thoughts. Lost, so many lost. Turin, don't let him take you. Lyra's voice wavered as she fought to keep her footing against the onslaught of shadow. Her face, lined with desperation, was the only steady point in the whirl of darkness. But the doctor tightened his grip on the Nexi, its dark glow intensifying as it fed on Lynx's struggle. Embrace the darkness, Lynx. It's all that remains for you. From the shadows beyond the lab's glow, the Clons emerged, their colorful costumes muted against the cold, sterile surroundings. For once, their faces, painted in wild patterns of red, blue, and yellow, were drawn with a seriousness that belied their usual jesting nature. Jix, the blue and orange Clon, stepped forward, his expression unusually grim as he took in the sight of Lynx's chains and the Nexi's dark glow. We have watched from the edges, Sister. Jix spoke softly, his voice carrying a strange, lilting rhythm that seemed out of place amidst the grim atmosphere. His words were directed at Lyra, but his gaze lingered on the doctor, the lines of his face hardening. This darkness, it's not just in the lab. It reaches deep into the hearts of those who crave power. Lyra threw a glance over her shoulder, caught between relief and frustration at their sudden appearance. Now's not the time, Jix, she faltered as the Plague Doctor turned his gaze toward the Clons, his masked face unreadable. The doctor's voice oozed with disdain. Clowns meddling where they don't belong. I should have expected such foolishness. He raised the Nexi, its glow pulsing, and the shadows around him seemed to swell, gathering like a storm. But the Clons held their ground. Jix lifted his staff, tapping it rhythmically against the floor. The other Clons formed a circle, their movements precise and synchronized, as if they'd rehearsed this moment countless times. We know the tricks of the mind, Jix intoned, his voice deepening, taking on a cadence that resonated through the lab. Let us distract him while you fight. The air shifted as the Clons began to chant in a low, melodic murmur, their voices weaving together in an ancient rhyme. It was a sound that carried a strange power, a mix of sorrow and joy that felt like laughter just on the edge of tears. The shadows stirred as if uncertain of their own nature, and the oppressive weight of the Plague Doctor's influence seemed to waver. Lynx's breath hitched as the chant reached his ears, cutting through the fog clouding his mind. The darkness that coiled around his thoughts hesitated, as if struggling against the unexpected melody. For the first time, he felt a small space opening within the iron grip of the Plague Doctor's commands, a space where he could remember warmth, where he could almost hear Lyra's voice without it being drowned out. The Plague Doctor's eyes narrowed behind his mask, and he hissed with frustration. Enough. He lashed out with a tendril of shadow, aiming to shatter the Clon's circle, but their voices only grew louder, deflecting the attack with the resonance of their chant. The shadows recoiled, curling back like smoke caught in a sudden breeze. Lyra seized the opportunity, gripping her metal rod tighter and surging toward the Plague Doctor, her movements quick and precise. Turan, fight it. They're giving us a chance. She swung with all her strength, forcing the Plague Doctor to divert his focus as he barely blocked the blow. Jex and the Clons continued their strange dance, their colorful garments spinning as they moved in unison, a chaotic whirl of motion that somehow pushed back against the darkness. Each step seemed to distort the air around them, bending the shadows and making the cold light flicker. We cannot hold him long, Jix warned, his voice strained. Use this time, sister, before the darkness swallows you both. The energy around them crackled as the Clons pressed on, their chant rising to a fever pitch. The Plague Doctor stumbled, caught off guard by the disruption, and a snarl twisted his lips behind the mask. He gathered his power, preparing to strike back with renewed fury, but for a moment, the dark tendrils around Lynx's mind loosened and the memory of Lyra's laughter broke through the haze. Turan, this isn't just about us. Lyra's voice was desperate, her strikes growing more frantic as she fought to keep the Plague Doctor's attention. He's using the Nexi to pierce the veil between worlds. If he succeeds, the Shire Kingdom will fall. Her words, though barely audible over the rising chant, carried a weight that reached Lynx through the fog. He could feel the warmth of her hand in his, pulling him back to a time when they believed in sunlight and freedom. He clung to that memory, using it like a lifeline to pull himself out of the darkness. The Clans, sensing the shift in Lynx, redoubled their efforts, their movements becoming wilder, their laughter strangely joyful, even as it held an undercurrent of sadness. It was as if they understood that their role in this moment went beyond mere distraction. This was their stand against the shadows, a chance to prove that even in darkness, light could find a way to break through. The Plague Doctor's mask gleamed in the dim light, his eyes glinting with malevolent satisfaction. He raised a hand, the dark Nexi pulsing in his grasp, and a surge of shadowy tendrils erupted from his palm, slashing through the air like living whips. Enough game, sister. Watch as he becomes mine again. With a sweep of his arm, the shadows lashed out, forcing Lyra to throw herself to the side. The tendrils struck the metal floor with a sharp crack, leaving deep gouges in their wake. She rolled back to her feet, breathless, her grip tightening around the metal rod. Her muscles ached, but she refused to let go, her eyes locked on Lynx. Tyran, you can't let him win. The shadows swirled around Lynx, dragging him deeper into the cold, twisting darkness. His vision blurred as memories collided, moments of warmth and sunlight mixed with the cold bite of the chains binding him now. But he felt his sister's presence like a faint glow, but the Plague Doctor's voice, insidious and cruel, drowned it out. You are nothing without me, boy. Submit, and you will know peace. I can't. His voice wavered, each word a struggle. He raised a trembling hand, fighting to grip the last shred of memory that hadn't yet been consumed by the shadows. He remembered Lyra's laughter, bright, unrestrained, like the summer breeze, but it felt so far away like a dream he could no longer reach. The Plague Doctor leaned closer, his masked face inches from Lynx's, his whispering voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. She is nothing, a memory that holds you back. Embrace the strength I have given you? No. Lyra's shout rang out, fierce and raw. She lunged at the Plague Doctor, swinging the rod with all her might. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, the metal clashing against the Nexi's glow. Sparks flew, lighting up the room in a brief flash as the Plague Doctor staggered, his grip on Lynx faltering for just a heartbeat. In that moment, Lynx felt the shadows loosen, and he saw his sister clearly, her face drawn with pain but blazing with determination. Remember who you are, Tyran, she pleaded, her voice breaking with emotion. Remember our promise. Her words cut through the fog, and for a heartbeat, Lynx felt like he was back in the sunlit fields of their childhood, running through wildflowers. He reached for that feeling, trying to hold on to it, but the darkness clawed back, more desperate and furious than before. The Plague Doctor's eyes flared with rage behind his mask, and he thrust the Nexi forward, its dark energy flaring with a malevolent glow. Enough of this. He unleashed a wave of energy that sent Lyra sprawling back, slamming her against the wall with a bone-jarring thud. She gasped, the breath knocked from her lungs, but she forced herself to rise, dragging herself back to her feet, despite the pain that racked her body. The Clans' chanting faltered as the force of the Plague Doctor's attack reverberated through the air, but they continued, voices trembling with effort. Jix's face was a mask of strain as he pressed on, his painted smile turned grim. Hold on, sister, we're almost through. But the Plague Doctor turned his gaze toward them, a cold smile curling beneath his mask. You really think you can defy me with such childish tricks? He lashed out with a burst of shadow, scattering the Clan's circle. Jix and his companions fell back, their voices silenced as the shadows consumed their rhythm. With the Clan's protection gone, the shadows closed in around Lynx, but his mind clung to the memory of Lyra's voice, even as the darkness roared. He reached for her, his chains rattling as he strained against the Plague Doctor's control. Lyra, I can't. But then, the Plague Doctor's influence surged, twisting his thoughts into something cruel and jagged. A blade materialized in Lynx's hand, a dark reflection of the Nexi's power. His mind blurred, the commands overwhelming the last of his resistance. His vision filled with shadow as he turned toward the silhouette of his sister. Lyra saw the shift in his eyes, a darkness that was not his own, and her heart clenched with a realization that came too late. No, Tyran, fight it, I'm right here. Her voice broke as Lynx lunged forward, the blade flashing in the dim light. Time seemed to slow, every second stretching as the distance between them closed. Lyra's eyes met his, filled with a mixture of fear and acceptance. She tried to reach out, to stop him, but the blade found its mark. A sharp gasp escaped her lips as the cold metal plunged into her side, and she fell against him, the weight of her body a shock that jolted through Lynx's mind like lightning. He froze, the blade slipping from his grip as he caught her, the warmth of her blood seeping through his hands. "Lyra, what have I?" The plague doctor's laughter echoed through the lab, sharp and mocking as he stepped back, savoring the scene. "Look at you, Lynx. You are my masterpiece, a perfect weapon." Lynx's vision blurred with tears, the realization of what he'd done crashing over him like a wave, dragging him under. He held Lyra close, her breath shallow against his ear, her strength fading with each passing second. "Tyran, I believed in you," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Her words tore through him, leaving a raw, gaping wound where hope had been. He felt the warmth of their past slipping away, replaced by the chill of her blood on his hands. He choked out a sob, the sound hollow and broken. I'm so sorry." The shadows around them receded, as if even they were retreating from the enormity of what had happened. The plague doctor's triumphant smirk remained, but for the first time, Lynx felt something stir deep within him, a spark of rage, ignited by the pain of his loss. As Lyra's eyes fluttered closed, her final breath fading into the cold air, Lynx felt something snap inside him. He cradled her lifeless form against him, a howl of grief tearing from his throat, echoing through the empty halls of the lab. The plague doctor's satisfaction turned to surprise as Lynx's hands tightened into fists, the Nexi's power surging through him with a new, terrible strength. Lynx knelt beside Lyra's still form, her warmth fading in his arms, the life that had been snuffed out too quickly leaving a hollow ache in his chest. He cradled her head against his shoulder, his body trembling as he pressed his forehead against hers. Her blood seeped through his fingers, staining the gloves that had once been clean. The air around them was heavy with silence, a silence that crushed the breath from his lungs, leaving only the weight of his guilt. The plague doctor's cold laughter echoed through the lab, cutting through the silence like a blade. "I look at you, Lynx. She gave her life for nothing. And now you are mine, bound by your own hand." Lynx's hands clenched tighter around Lyra's lifeless form, the rage inside him boiling over, searing through the despair. He felt the Nexi's power coiling within him, a dark pulse that thrummed in time with his heartbeat, amplifying the raw edge of his grief. The fragment of his mind that had resisted Ogric's conditioning flared with new intensity, as if Lyra's last breath had left a spark of clarity behind. Slowly, he lowered Lyra's body to the ground, his movements gentle despite the fury seething through him. His fingers brushed against her cheek, smearing the blood across his own face as he reached for the mask that had hidden his pain for so long. He lifted it to his lips, pressing his fingers against the smeared crimson, drawing a jagged red line, a twisted smile, across the mask's white surface. When he placed the mask back over his face, the smile burned into his mind like a brand, a cruel reminder of the bond he had broken and the promise he had failed to keep. But it also held something else, an anchor, a focus for the storm raging within him. He rose to his feet, turning to face the plague doctor, his eyes burning with the dark fire that pierced through the mask's eye holes. The plague doctor's smug grin faltered as he sensed the shift in Lynx. He raised the Nexi stone, its dark energy crackling, but there was a flicker of uncertainty behind the mask. "You think a painted smile will save you? You are still nothing without." Before he could finish, Lynx lunged, faster than he had ever moved, the power of the Nexi coursing through his veins. His hands, now free of the chains that had once bound him, struck with the force of a storm, driving the plague doctor back. The lab's walls shuddered under the impact, vials shattering, glass raining down around them like broken stars. The plague doctor staggered, his beak-like mask cracking as Lynx's fist pounded into him, the strength behind each blow fueled by a fury that bordered on madness. "You took everything from me." Lynx's voice roared, echoing through the shattered remains of the lab. Each word carried the weight of his loss, the promise of vengeance that had taken root in his soul. The plague doctor gasped as he tried to regain his footing, summoning a vortex of shadow that coiled around him like a shield. "You are nothing more than a puppet. Lynx, you think this changes anything?" He sneered, but there was a tremor in his voice, a crack in the confidence that had defined him. Lynx didn't pause. He struck through the shadows with a power that tore through the darkness, shattering the plague doctor's defenses. The vortex collapsed with a howl, dissipating into nothingness as Lynx's hands closed around the plague doctor's throat. He lifted him, the weight of the masked figure dangling like a broken marionette. "She believed in me," Lynx snarled, his voice low and dangerous, his grip tightening. "And I will make sure her death was not in vain." For the first time, the plague doctor's voice wavered. "You can't defeat the darkness," he rasped, his words a choked whisper. Lynx's eyes narrowed and he leaned in close, his breath warm against the plague doctor's mask. "Watch me." With the final surge of strength, he slammed the plague doctor down, the impact reverberating through the lab's floor. The Nexi stone slipped from the plague doctor's grasp, clattering to the ground and rolling away, its glow flickering like a dying ember. Lynx stood over him, his breath heaving, his mind swirling with the echoes of Lyra's voice. Her laughter, her final plea, the warmth that now seemed like a distant memory. The plague doctor lay still, the light in his eyes dimming behind the mask, his grip on life slipping away like sand through his fingers. As his breath rattled to a halt, Lynx felt no satisfaction, only the gnawing emptiness left by the weight of his sister's loss. He reached down, grabbing the dark Nexi stone, feeling its power pulse against his skin. It whispered to him a promise of control, of vengeance, but he shoved the thoughts aside, pocketing the stone without another glance. The clans, silent witnesses to the final moments of the battle, gathered behind Lynx, their vibrant colors muted in the dim light. Jix stepped forward, placing a hand on Lynx's shoulder, his voice barely more than a whisper. "She gave you strength when you needed it most. We will not forget her sacrifice." Lynx turned his masked face toward Jix, the red smile glinting in the pale light. "Nor will I," he murmured, his voice a rough edge beneath the mask. He looked down at Lyra's still form, the weight of her loss pressing into his chest like a vice. "But I will make sure that the ones responsible pay. This won't end here." Jix nodded, the other clans bowing their heads in a gesture of respect. Together they gathered what remained of their fallen, preparing to leave the ruins of the lab behind. But Lynx remained standing, staring down at the broken fragments of his past, the painted smile on his mask a mockery of the warmth he had once known. As he turned away, stepping into the shadows that stretched beyond the lab's broken doors, he felt the Nexi's energy thrumming through him, dark, relentless, and pulsing with potential. He knew the power he now carried could just as easily destroy him as it could serve his will. But for the first time, he welcomed that uncertainty, embracing the darkness as a weapon instead of a shackle. With every step, the weight of Lyra's sacrifice settled deeper into his bones, and the painted smile on his mask became more than just a symbol of his failure. It was a promise, a vow that he would carry her memory into every battle that followed. He would become the shadow that hunted those who twisted the world for their own gain. Lynx disappeared into the night, leaving behind the ruins of Ogrich's lab and the echoes of his sister's final words. In his mind, the memory of her smile lingered like a distant star, something to guide him through the darkness, even as the path before him grew ever darker.